Hello, and welcome to Nothing But Star Wars. I'm your host Chris, and today we'll be looking back at the sequel to one of the Star Wars franchise's most popular video games, The Force Unleashed. Released 10 years ago in October 2010, The Force Unleashed 2 found itself in a very odd period of Star Wars history. With 2 years until the Disney acquisition of Lucasfilm and the Clone Wars animated series only just entering its third season, there really wasn't anything big on the horizon, and for a teenage fan like myself, The Force Unleashed 2 was the most exciting Star Wars event of the year. Now, I loved the first Force Unleashed. I played it for hours on my friend's PS3, my dad's PS3, and eventually on the only console I actually owned at the time, the Nintendo DS. Yeah. For those unfamiliar, The Force Unleashed takes place a few years before the original Star Wars trilogy. You play as Starkiller / Galen Marek, a Force-sensitive youth trained to be Darth Vader's secret apprentice. After one too many betrayals from his master, Starkiller rejects the dark side, helps form the Rebel Alliance with a Jedi Master named Kota and his own pilot, Juno Eclipse, and sacrifices himself to save the day. Unless you choose the dark side ending. Yeah, we'll come back to that. I read the comic tie-in, played the Ultimate Sith Edition DLC, bought the exclusive LEGO set and action figures, and generally just liked the way it fit into both Star Wars canon and also the Infinities timeline. For those not aware, the Infinities series started as a series of comics retelling each Star Wars film from the original trilogy, seeing how they'd play out if one thing changed. For example, what if Luke's torpedo missed in A New Hope? Or what if Luke succumbed to the cold on Hoth? Cheery stuff. Anyway, I generally enjoyed the story. It was interesting to see the idea of Vader with an apprentice, while at the same time, the Clone Wars was giving Anakin an apprentice too.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme. Every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one.
They sure do, George. The characters were interesting, it had the classic Star Wars light side, dark side dilemma at the centre, and Vader and Palpatine accidentally creating the Rebel Alliance was a neat idea. Some of it was a bit too convenient. Things like Starkiller's house symbol becoming the Rebel Alliance insignia springs to mind. I still prefer the Alliance formation in canon that's come about thanks to Rebels, but the Force Unleashed version is still a neat alternative. Because the ending of Force Unleashed was very decisive, no one really expected a sequel, at least not soon. But then, the very first enigmatic teaser for The Force Unleashed 2 debuted online in December 2009, followed in summer 2010 by a full trailer. Then there were 2 small ads focusing on the Starkiller-Vader rivalry, and even a Robot Chicken tie-in.
Lord Vader, Starkiller has broken through
to our hearts, yes, here at the Empire.
Something you want to tell me?
So it looked epic, it looked intriguing, the idea of Starkiller somehow being resurrected was interesting, raising all these questions about the story and characters and gameplay. And then the game came out. The plot of The Force Unleashed 2 is as follows. You are a clone of Starkiller, the latest in a long line of Vader's failed attempts after all the others were driven insane. Your character is haunted by visions of Juno and promptly escapes the cloning facilities on Kamino. You track Kota to the Gladiator Ring on Cato Nemoidia, return to the Rebel flagship with him, fight your way back to Kamino, confront Vader, and... Yes, the main issue with The Force Unleashed 2 is that it is criminally short. I recently picked it up on Steam during a sale and played through the whole game on medium difficulty, just for a bit of a challenge. I completed it in just 4 hours. The game's world is also a lot smaller. Force Unleashed 1 was a galaxy-spanning odyssey from the forests of Kashyyyk to the platforms of Bespin, from a TIE fighter factory to a ship on collision course with the sun, and more. The Force Unleashed 2 only has 3 actual locations: Kamino, Cato Nemoidia, and the Rebel cruiser Salvation. Aren't you forgetting Dagobah, I hear you ask? Well, I'm going to show you right now the entirety of the Dagobah gameplay and let you decide if it counts as an actual level or not. "22 seconds. 22 seconds and then an eye-rolling Yoda cameo to pad out the marketing campaign. Great. And the other planets are more or less a series of copy-pasted corridors, hallways, and loading screens barely disguised as elevators. The basic gameplay is identical to The Force Unleashed 1, i.e. spam your lightsaber and occasionally use lightning on enemies that resist it. The end of dual QuickTime events are still present, but they've been massively watered down, so I hope you like watching an AT-ST get sliced up the same way over and over again. 2 new additions are a Fury meter, which, when full, allows you to literally disintegrate enemies. and Mind Trick, which is so hilarious to use it almost makes everything else worth it.
There is nothing for you here.
I've got to get out of here.
So if the base game is a bust, what about the story and characters? Oh boy. One of the great things about the Force Unleashed 1 is that it's basically every nerd's power fantasy, a way for fans to be the most powerful Force user in the universe and throw stormtroopers around, fall in love with a hot pilot, beat up Darth Vader, etc, etc. The problem with the Force Unleashed 2 is that it's so busy letting you do that it forgets to tell any kind of compelling story. Like the Darth Bane novels, it's one of those things that seems great when you're a teenager, but looking back is the epitome of that immature, overdone edginess that was rife in the expanded universe at that time. Lots of violence and nastiness for the sake of going, look, Star Wars can also be dark and gritty, while any actual character development is totally abandoned. Juno, the pilot with a heart of gold who you end up falling in love with by the end of Force Unleashed 1, is so poorly served by the sequel. She's always being captured or in need of rescue and is largely portrayed through off-screen dialogue, visions, and cutscenes where Starkiller isn't even present. In fact, she has just 2 lines of dialogue spoken directly to him in the entire game.
We're alive. Prepare for light speed.
So yeah, Juno is done so dirty. To be honest, this is pretty much par for the course for Star Wars at the time. Force Unleashed 1 decided to sex up both female antagonists, Shark T and Maris Brood, while the comic artists could barely restrain themselves from shoving Darth Talon into every panel they could. Even future fan favourite Ahsoka, a literal teenager, was running into battle like this. Wow, old George loved a crop top, didn't he? When it comes to Starkiller himself, there's actually a lot of potential in the premise here for an exploration of what these awesome powers do to someone mentally and physically, especially when they're a clone. There's a hint of it in the opening cutscene, but then they just copy-paste some character models into the Dagobah cinematic and leave it at that. The writers are so uninterested in anything beyond faster, more intense combat that by the time you see any of the other clones, they're just another obstacle to cut through on the way to Vader. Incidentally, this final boss battle is one of the least satisfying experiences I've ever had in a video game. You spam lightning until Vader's health bar is chipped away, and then do it again because he has another one hiding directly underneath it. And that's not even getting into the enormous amount of basic plot issues and inconsistencies rife in the story. How come we can suddenly clone Force users? Why do you need them when you already have these acolytes who can fight against the Force? Why not just build an army of unstable clones? How has the Emperor not heard about all this? So it's safe to say my best friend and I, who'd been feverishly excited for this game, were massively disappointed. And we weren't alone. Middling reviews echoed this sentiment, with many rightfully claiming that Force Unleashed 2 felt more like expensive DLC for the first game. That wasn't until they actually made DLC for it, in which, having killed the light side Starkiller clone, you go to Endor and individually kill Chewie, Han, and Princess Leia in some of the most wrong-headedly violent action set pieces I've ever seen in Star Wars media. The Force Unleashed 2 already has a terrible problem with legacy characters, and also the first game's Ultimate Sith Edition does, so let's not even go there. How am I using Force Lightning to defeat a ghost? Explain it, George. Make it make sense. The Force Unleashed 3 was allegedly in the planning stage as late as 2013, with writer Hayden Blackman and star Sam Witwer hoping to release it in the wake of The Force Awakens. It was to be more open world with an emphasis on teamwork, as Starkiller and Vader would be stranded together on a hostile planet and forced to work together to survive. Imagine a video game version of Paul S. Kemp's new canon novel Lords of the Sith. However, LucasArts was shut down in 2015 and the game was cancelled without so much as a scrap of concept art ever created. Looking back on The Force Unleashed 2, the last 10 years of Star Wars content, including 4 new video games from EA, I honestly think the mixed reviews were a little too kind. I love the prequel era and George Lucas' vision for that universe, but The Force Unleashed 2 has some real last gasp aura about it. Lucasfilm as a company was barely producing new Star Wars content besides The Clone Wars, which was nowhere near its prime, and the comedy show Detours, which remains shelved to this day, and with good reason.
Hey, Chew! I'm back, You get it?
It felt like the one time in Star Wars history that milking the cash cow felt like a really fair statement. As an utterly ludicrous power fantasy slice 'em up, it's a fun distraction, but overall this is a lackluster gaming experience, a poor story badly told, and the epitome of hurriedly produced fan service. Phew, finally got that out of my system. I'm gonna go play more Squadrons. Now that is a Star Wars game. Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching. This is my first video on this new channel and I hope to make many more, so please consider subscribing and leaving a comment telling me what you thought of the game. See you next time, and may the Force be with you.